They say the devil is in the details, so you should know exactly which details about the devil you might have gotten wrong. These are the most common misconceptions about the Prince of Darkness. In the popular conception of the devil, he's the embodiment of pure evil, and therefore against everything that God stands for. The idea is that God and Satan are constantly at war with each other for the souls of humanity, sending out their angels against the others in order to destroy their greatest enemy. This view, however, isn't supported by the Bible at all. It's only in post-biblical Jewish literature that Satan tries to upend the rule of God in this way. The idea of Satan as the ruler of fallen angels who rebelled against God simply doesn't exist in the Hebrew scriptures. The idea of more or less equal forces of good and evil battling against each other likely came to be after Jews were exposed to the more dualistic religion of Zoroastrianism when they were exiled to Babylon in the 6th century BC. Even though Satan is portrayed more clearly as an enemy of God in the New Testament, he's still not anywhere close to equal in power. The most he can do is to try to tempt Jesus into abandoning his mission of salvation and worship him instead, all of which Jesus resists without much effort. It's only weaker-willed humans like Judas who succumb to Satan's power. Satan and his minions don't stand a chance against Jesus.
Satan's power is fierce, but nothing's more powerful than the Lord's force!
The idea of the devil as God's evil opposite also evokes the image of Satan as being all-powerful the way God is portrayed in the Bible. Furthermore, he is seen as the origin of evil, a dark creator who brings suffering and ruin into the world at his whim in an attempt to destroy humanity. The Bible, however, paints a very different picture. The book of Job gives a clearer impression of Satan's relationship to God by showing that he is merely one of a court of heavenly beings who seeks God's favor. His power is shown to be limited throughout the book, as he constantly has to ask permission to enact suffering upon Job and his family. He can do nothing without God's express approval. The devil cannot be equal with God, as he is a creation of God and is in fact his servant who can only act on his master's behalf. Furthermore, the Bible makes it clear that Satan creates nothing, not even evil, as God is the creator of all. In the book of Isaiah, God states, "I form light and create darkness. I make weal and create woe. I, the Lord, do all these things." Satan isn't an evil God opposing a good one. He's an accuser, slanderer, and tempter under God's authority. It's a common image in movies, cartoons, and newspaper comics. The devil as the boss of hell, torturing sinners and welcoming the newly damned to his domain. This extremely common view comes from the same dualistic instinct that makes people think of Satan as God's archenemy. Just as God rules heaven, the devil too must have his domain. However, things are actually a bit different. Hell isn't Satan's kingdom, it's his prison, and he's not even there yet. The book of Revelation reads, "The devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever." But this is a vision of the future set to come after Judgment Day, which by most accounts hasn't happened yet. So if he's not in hell now, where is the devil? He answers that himself in the book of Job, which states, "The Lord said to the accuser, 'Where have you come from?' The accuser answered the Lord, 'From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it.'" So if Satan is meant to be tortured in hell, who does the torturing? Extra-canonical Jewish and Christian literature says that it's God's own archangel Uriel. If you have ever attended Sunday school, it's likely that one of the earliest stories you heard was the account of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and how they were tempted into sin by a serpent who convinced Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
I cannot argue with God.
Unless you taste the fruit.
For centuries, the serpent who tricked the first humans into betraying God has been identified with the devil. However, Old Testament studies professor John Day explains that nowhere in the text of Genesis is the serpent said to be Satan. If you interpret the Bible as a set of documents written by humans and not the divine word of God, the idea of Satan hadn't been developed by the time Genesis was written. In fact, it's not until the 1st century BC, apocryphal book of wisdom, that the devil is blamed for bringing death into the world. For many Christians, the book of Revelation makes explicit the connection between the serpent and Satan, with God's angels defeating the dragon, Satan, as a fulfillment of God's statement in Genesis 3 that Eve's offspring would crush the serpent's head. The allusion in Revelation is probably to the sea serpent Leviathan from Jewish mythology. The Eden serpent is just one of God's many creatures, one that plays a pivotal part in the story of mankind. The devil is known by many different names, including Satan, Beelzebub, the father of lies, Old Scratch, Ludi if you're Scottish, Iblis if you're Muslim, and so on. But if you were to ask someone what the devil's real name is, most people would probably say Lucifer. The popular understanding is that Satan was one of God's angels, named Lucifer, who was cast out of heaven when he rebelled. But if you're going strictly by biblical texts, the word Lucifer is never applied to Satan. UCLA professor Henry Ansgar Kelly has explained that the word Lucifer is the Latin translation of a Hebrew word that was used to refer to the morning star, which is now known to be the planet Venus. It was only in the 3rd century that the philosopher Origen connected the falling morning star with Satan falling from heaven.
Lucifer, morning star. Pleasure.
What's more, the word Lucifer, which literally means light bringer, is applied in some translations of the New Testament to Jesus, not to the devil. Jesus himself is the morning star because he represents a new day for humanity. Like much of what is commonly believed about Satan and hell these days, the popularity of Lucifer as the devil's name can be traced back to Dante's Inferno and John Milton's Paradise Lost. So if Lucifer isn't the devil's name, what is it? Well, the obvious response to that is that his name is Satan, but that's not his name either. It's not a name at all, it's a title. The English word Satan comes from a Hebrew word meaning adversary or one who plots against another. It's used several times in the Hebrew scriptures and very rarely to refer to an evil spirit. It's not his name, it's his job, to roam the earth and seek out people who he can accuse of wrongdoing. The Hebrew word gets translated as diabolos, or slanderer in the Greek Bible, which is the source for the word devil. So again, a job description. That's not to say that there are no proper names used to refer to the prince of darkness in the Bible. The Gospels refer to the prince of demons as Beelzebub, but since that means Lord of the Flies, it might be another title or epithet rather than a proper name. The best bet for the devil's real name might be Belial, which is used in both the Hebrew and Christian scriptures as well as numerous non-canonical texts. There are other possibilities too. In much Jewish literature, the chief devil is given the name Samael. Just as the name Lucifer has been commonly accepted as the original name of the devil, most people have the same understanding of his origin story. He was an angel who rebelled against God for various reasons, and a third of the angels sided with him and fell from heaven to become demons. This version of events became fully codified in Western culture thanks to the enduring influence of Milton's Paradise Lost. However, there's no actual evidence of the fall of Satan and his angels in the primary canon of the Bible. The only mention of Satan falling is in Revelation, which is supposed to be referring to future events. Furthermore, the 1/3 of angels, or stars in the extended metaphor, might not even be those who took the devil's side, but rather the ones he defeated. The text is ambiguous. So, if there's no biblical evidence for a fall of Satan and his angels without reading things into Isaiah and Revelation, where did demons come from? Jewish literature tells us that demons were the ghosts of the Nephilim, the giant offspring of human women and fallen angels who fell not due to Lucifer's pride, but regular old desire for the ladies. Even a kid can tell you what the devil looks like. He's red, with horns, a pointed tail, a pitchfork, cloven hooves, and so on. It probably won't surprise you at this point that this image bears no relation whatsoever to the devil of the Bible. In fact, the Bible never gives a physical description of the devil at any point, and that was a problem for artists who wanted to depict Satan for religious illustrations. Anyone who wanted to paint the devil had to pull from other sources, most prominently Greek mythology. As a result, depictions of Satan and other biblical demons ended up taking on elements of satyrs and fauns, such as cloven hooves, goat legs, and little horns. Satan's pitchfork is likely derived from the trident of the god Poseidon. Using the goatish figure of Pan and his satyrs as a starting point, medieval artists developed Satan into a bestial figure covered with horns, fur, and eventually scars, boils, and other deformities. Sometimes he has faces all over his body, or worse, his butt is also a face. While in the Middle Ages, illustrators depicted the Prince of Darkness as the grossest creature they could think of, later portrayals came to depict him as sleeker and more debonair. Milton's Paradise Lost turns him into a tragic hero, but Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust goes a step further by having the devil figure Mephistopheles be a charming, charismatic dandy, one who can easily persuade someone. It's much easier to imagine Jason Sudeikis on Weekend Update than the boil-covered devil of the Middle Ages, and in a way, the more debonair devil is closer to the version presented in the Bible. The Discovery series rightly points out that as Satan is a spiritual being, he's incorporeal. He has no physical body, so he doesn't look like anything at all. But even though the Bible never describes the devil's true form, the Apostle Paul does warn the church at Corinth to beware, not of a beastly demon, but of beauty. In his belief, if the devil were to present himself to you, it would not be in a beastly form that would terrify you, but rather a beautiful form that would fool, tempt, and persuade you.
Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
People who believe deeply in Satan also believe in people who worship him. They might have images in their heads of people in black robes sacrificing animals, defacing churches, or, in all likelihood, playing Dungeons and Dragons. These fears ultimately led to the feedback loop that was the Satanic panic that hit its highs in the 1980s, with innocent people being accused of harming children to the devil's delight. While it's true that there are people out there who self-identify as Satanists, all that other stuff is supremely fake. As a real Satanist told The Independent, Satanists don't actually worship Satan. They don't even believe he's real. Modern-day Satanists are atheists for whom Satan is a symbol of rebellion, pride, individualism, and rejection of a Christian-centric status quo. Today's Satanism embraces skepticism, so many of the spooky toys that suburban moms likely associate with Satanists, Ouija boards, tarot cards, and mystical objects, have no meaning to them other than aesthetics. Their central principles are nevertheless focused on egoism and carnal pleasures, indulgence, vengeance, and ethics based on self-interest. Members of the Satanic Temple often campaign for political causes, including reproductive rights and the separation of church and state. Two symbols seem to be associated with the worship of Satan more than any others in the public consciousness: the upside-down cross and the pentagram. If you were ever a teen wanting to freak out the man, these are definitely the things you would spray paint onto the wall behind the school gym. The presence of a 5-pointed star in imagery has even caused accusations of Satanism against groups ranging from a Mormon church to multinational consumer goods corporation Procter & Gamble. However, the truth is these symbols have origins within, not against, the church.
You know, it's funny, most people associate the pentacle with neo-paganism and witchcraft, but it has its roots in ancient Hebrew scripture.
The inverted cross, said to be a mockery of Christ's suffering by those who think it's satanic, is what's known as a St. Peter's cross. St. Peter was crucified upside down because he felt unworthy of dying in the same way that Jesus had before him. That's not all. While pentagrams are common symbols in many religions, they were once used to represent the 5 wounds that Christ received at the crucifixion. As a result, the 5-pointed star was once actually a protective motif to drive away evil.